What if the only way to find yourself was to disappear completely? She meticulously planned her escape for 8 months, right under her husband's nose. He never saw it coming. Get ready for a revelation that will leave you breathless. Before we dive into this story of betrayal and transformation, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if this narrative impacts you, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because tomorrow I have a very special surprise prepared for you. My husband barely looked up as I placed my wedding ring on the table next to them, too engrossed in the woman in his arms to register the weight of what he was leaving behind. Keep dancing with her, Ethan. You won't even notice I'm gone. What he didn't know was that I had spent the last 8 months preparing for this very moment. And by tomorrow morning, I would be completely untraceable. I stood on the edge of the crowded ballroom at the yacht club's charity gala in Malibu, watching Ethan, my husband of 11 years, spin Isabella Foster across the floor. Ethan had always been an impressive dancer, one of the many talents that had attracted me to him when we met in law school 15 years ago. Tonight, his tailored tuxedo emphasized his athletic build as he guided Isabella through a complicated tango sequence. Her coral-colored dress, designed by a former client of my interior design business, complemented his suit perfectly, as if they had coordinated their outfits. "They make quite a harmonious couple, don't you think?" commented Diane, appearing at my side with her usual glass of sherry in hand. As the wife of Ethan's legal partner and my supposed friend, her tone suggested she was testing my reaction rather than offering support. "They certainly do," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "Ethan has always appreciated elegant dance partners." Diane scrutinized my face, clearly disappointed by my composure. "Isabella has been working closely with the partners on the Oceanside development. She's very dedicated to the project." The Oceanside development, a luxury residential complex that had consumed Ethan's time and attention for the last 8 months. The project that required late nights, weekend meetings, and increasingly frequent and poorly documented business trips. "I'm sure she is," I responded, taking a deliberate sip of my kava. In the relative quiet of the marble bathroom, I checked my appearance in the mirror. At 38, I still retained the high cheekbones and clear skin that had once landed me occasional modeling gigs to supplement my college expenses. My dark hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, showcasing the pearl earrings Ethan had given me for our 10th anniversary. Earrings that I had discovered were significantly less valuable than the matching necklace Isabella had worn at the firm's dinner last month. Stepping out of the bathroom, I discreetly checked my phone. A single text message confirmed that everything was in place. "All set. Car waiting at East Entrance. M." Mark, my oldest friend from college and the only person who knew what I was about to do, had been instrumental in preparing for my departure. As a cybersecurity specialist, who had once been a victim of his own partner's betrayal, he understood both the emotional and logistical complexities of disappearing from a life that had become unrecognizable. I returned to the ballroom just as the orchestra transitioned to a slower song. Ethan and Isabella remained on the dance floor, now clinging in a way that exceeded the bounds of professional courtesy. His hand rested low on her back, their faces close enough that her reddish-brown hair occasionally brushed his cheek as they twirled. Around them, other couples danced with appropriate distance between them, occasionally casting glances at the intimate pair with expressions that ranged from disapproval to complicit amusement. In that moment, seeing my husband embrace another woman with such obvious desire, I felt strangely calm. The serenity of a decision irrevocably made. I navigated through the crowd until I came to a stop at the edge of the dance floor, directly in their line of sight. Ethan saw me first, his expression briefly flickering with something akin to guilt before returning to studied indifference. Isabella noticed his momentary tension and turned slightly, offering me a smile that managed to be both apologetic and triumphant. "Chloe," Ethan acknowledged as they danced closer to where I stood. Isabella and I were just discussing the implications of sonification for the commercial spaces of the Oceanside development. With so much passion, I observed, my tone neutral. "It must be a fascinating topic." Isabella had the decency to blush slightly, though her grip on my husband's shoulder didn't loosen. "Ethan has been an incredible mentor," she said, her voice honeyed with false sincerity. "I've learned so much working so closely with him." "I'm sure you have," I replied, reaching into my clutch. "Don't let me interrupt your mentoring." I placed my platinum wedding band on a nearby cocktail table. The soft clink as it hit the glass surface was somehow audible over the music and conversation surrounding us. "Keep dancing with her, Ethan," I said in a low voice. "You won't even notice I'm gone." For a brief instant, confusion crossed his features. A rare look for a man who prided himself on always being the most well-informed person in any room. Isabella's expression shifted as the certainty in her eyes wavered upon registering the meaning of the ring on the table. "Chloe, don't be dramatic," Ethan said, his voice low but sharp. "We'll discuss this at home." "No," I replied simply. "We won't." I turned and walked away before he could respond, moving through the crowd with purpose. Behind me, I could sense Ethan making excuses to Isabella, preparing to follow me, to contain what he would perceive as an embarrassing public display. He wouldn't catch up to me. By the time he disentangled himself from Isabella and navigated the crowded ballroom, I would be in Mark's car, heading toward a future I had carefully built without Ethan's knowledge or involvement. What my husband didn't understand, what he had never bothered to discover in our years together, was that beneath my compliant exterior hid a woman of considerable resourcefulness and determination. While he was building his legal career and cultivating his relationship with Isabella, I had been systematically preparing for a life without him, gathering evidence, securing assets, and crafting an exit strategy so comprehensive it would confound even the best legal minds at his firm for years. Tonight was not just about a dance or even an affair. It was about reclaiming my identity from a man who had slowly erased it over the course of our marriage. And as I opened the heavy door of the east exit, feeling the cool night air on my skin, I smiled to think of what tomorrow would bring for us both. Mark was waiting exactly where he had promised, leaning against his sleek black Tesla with the engine running. When he saw me approach in my emerald dress, he immediately straightened, concern evident in his expression. "You actually did it," he said, opening the passenger door. "Are you okay?" I slid into the seat, the silk of my dress rustling against the leather interior. "I'm better than I've been in years." As Mark pulled away from the yacht club, I resisted the urge to look back. 11 years of marriage didn't deserve a backward glance. Not when I had spent the last 8 months looking forward. In the rearview mirror, I saw Ethan emerge from the east entrance doors, scanning the circular driveway with increasing agitation. His hand was clutching something small and metallic. My wedding ring. "He's going to call," Mark warned as we merged onto the coastal highway, the resort's lights diminishing behind us. "He's probably already blowing up your phone." I reached into my clutch and pulled out my personal cell phone, the one Ethan knew, and powered it off. "Let him call. This number will no longer exist by morning." Mark nodded, his eyes on the road as we headed north along the coast. At 42, Mark Chung had the calm of someone who had weathered his own storms. We had been friends since our college days at Stanford, before law school introduced me to Ethan, before Mark fell in love and was betrayed by his ex-husband. We had supported each other through our respective heartbreaks, his sudden and explosive, mine gradual and insidious. "Your go bag is in the trunk," he said, referring to the suitcase I had packed with essentials and stored at his apartment 2 months ago. "The new ID packet is in the glove compartment. The offshore account is active, and the private banking app is installed on your new phone." He tapped the console between us, where a smartphone I had never seen awaited on a charger. "Thank you," I said, the words inadequate for the magnitude of his help. "I couldn't have done this without you." Mark glanced at me briefly. "After what Jake did to me, and everything you did to help me rebuild, consider us even." I watched the familiar coastline rush by. The beaches where Ethan and I had walked during our courtship. The seaside restaurants where we had celebrated anniversaries. The scenic overlooks where we would sometimes park just to watch the sunset in silence. Memories of a marriage that had once felt solid, before ambition and success transformed my husband into someone I barely recognized. Thinking about the early days. Mark observed, reading my expression with the precision of a long friendship. Wondering where it all went wrong, I admitted. When exactly did Ethan decide I was an accessory instead of a partner? From what you've told me, it was a gradual shift. The classic scenario of the frog in slowly boiling water. He wasn't wrong. When Ethan and I met at Stanford Law, we were equals. Both ambitious, both bright, both from middle-class backgrounds, determined to build something significant. Our wedding, modest by the standards of Beverly Hills, was filled with promises of partnership, of building a life together where our careers would both flourish. The first compromise seemed reasonable, to put my career on hold temporarily while Ethan established himself at the prestigious firm of Ortega, Garrig's, and Associates. I took a position at a small design firm, using my aesthetic sensibilities and organizational skills while waiting for the right time to return to legal practice. That right time never came. Every year brought new reasons to delay my legal career. Ethan's first major case, his promotion to junior partner, the firm's expansion, the economic downturn that made new lawyer positions scarce. Meanwhile, my interior design work had evolved from a temporary distraction into a modestly successful business, though Ethan consistently referred to it as my little hobby when introducing me at firm events. Remember our second anniversary? I asked Mark, the memory surfacing unexpectedly. The dinner when Ethan announced he'd been assigned the Duero River development. Mark nodded. You were so proud of him. I spent that entire night asking questions about his new project, celebrating his success. Ethan answered every question about his work. He accepted every compliment. I looked at the darkening coastline. Later that week, I told him I'd landed the renovation of the Los Algo estate, my biggest design contract to that point. He changed the subject in under 2 minutes to talk about a new suit he wanted to buy. That pattern had repeated itself countless times throughout our marriage. My achievements minimized, his celebrated and centered. The disparity had been so gradual that I had convinced myself it was normal, that supporting his career was my role in our partnership. The final straw wasn't even the affair, I said quietly. It was finding out he'd mortgaged our home without telling me. Mark's hand tightened on the steering wheel. I still can't believe he pulled that off. Forged signatures are remarkably effective when you have a cooperating notary in your law firm. The discovery 3 months ago had been the catalyst for my escape plan. Finding mortgage documents hidden in Ethan's home office drawer. Documentation of a €750,000 loan against our fully paid-off house. Money that had vanished into accounts I couldn't access. When I confronted him, Ethan dismissed my concerns with a studied ease. It's a temporary liquidity solution, Chloe. The Oceanside development requires a certain personal investment from the partners. The returns will be spectacular. Trust me. Trust me. The phrase he had used countless times throughout our marriage, usually preceding decisions that benefited his career, his comfort, his image, while costing me fragments of my independence. Trust me when we sell your grandmother's house on the lake to invest in the firm. Trust me when we use your inheritance for the down payment on the Morelia property. Trust me when I say there's nothing between Isabella and me. Did you ever confront him directly about Isabella? Mark asked, as if reading my thoughts. What would be the point? He'd deny it. He'd make me feel paranoid and insecure. The classic Ethan playbook. I shook my head. Besides, Isabella wasn't the problem. She was just a symptom. The affair, which I had known about for at least 4 months, thanks to bank statements showing jewelry purchases and hotel charges in Lisbon when Ethan was supposedly at a partner retreat in Porto, was simply the final confirmation that our marriage now existed only as a convenient arrangement for Ethan. He wanted the respectable wife at home while he pursued his true passions elsewhere. You know he'll portray you as unstable, Mark warned as we turned off the coastal highway onto a smaller road heading inland. When he realizes what you've done, he'll create a narrative that makes him the victim. Let him. I felt a surprising lightness at the thought of Ethan weaving his stories, trying to control a situation that had already slipped from his hands. By the time he figures out the extent of what I've done, I'll be established somewhere he can't reach. Chloe, Mark looked at me with respect and perhaps a touch of concern. You've always been 10 steps ahead of everyone else. That's why you would have been a formidable lawyer. Maybe I still will be, I replied, allowing myself to consider possibilities that had seemed closed for years. As we drove away from the coast, away from the life I had shared with Ethan, I thought of the documentation carefully hidden in a secure cloud account. Copies of the forged mortgage papers, bank statements showing Ethan's systematic draining of our joint assets, records of his investments that never generated returns for our household. Evidence I had methodically gathered for months, not for vindication, but for self-preservation. We're almost there, Mark said as we approached a secluded cabin nestled among towering pines. The property, officially owned by a corporate entity Mark had created years ago, was our agreed-upon temporary safe house. The place where Chloe Sutton would disappear and someone new would emerge. Have you decided on a name? Mark asked as he parked by the cabin, the headlights illuminating a small covered porch. I smiled, feeling the first genuine emotion I had experienced in months. Eleanor. Eleanor Vance. The first name taken from my beloved grandmother. The last name simple and easy to forget. An identity I had been building piece by piece while Ethan was preoccupied with Isabella and the Oceanside development. Eleanor Vance, Mark repeated. It suits you somehow. Inside the cabin, warm and rustic with its stone fireplace and wood beams, I finally took off the uncomfortable heels I had worn to the gala. The physical relief equated to the emotional relief of stepping away from a marriage that had slowly suffocated me. I removed the diamond earrings, Ethan's calculated gift that had increased in value, an investment disguised as affection, and placed them on the coffee table. You can sell these, too, I told Mark, who would handle liquidating the assets I could legally claim while setting up my new life. Add them to the escape fund. Mark nodded, placing a glass of red wine in my hand. A Cabernet from a vineyard we had visited on a college road trip long before Ethan, before the complications, when possibilities seemed limitless. To Eleanor Vance, he toasted, raising his own glass. To the life that Chloe Sutton deserved. I clinked my glass against his, the simple ceremony marking the transition I had planned so carefully. To second chances, I added. As we sat in front of the fireplace, the crackling flames casting dancing shadows on the rustic walls, I felt a surprising absence of grief for my marriage. Perhaps I had already mourned it over the months of discovery and planning. Or perhaps there was nothing left to mourn after years of slow erosion. He must be home by now, I said, picturing Ethan walking into our impeccable Beverly Hills home, expecting to find me, expecting to be scolded for my dramatic gesture at the gala. Checking the bedroom, the guest room, calling my cell repeatedly. By morning, he'll be calling friends, family, maybe even hospitals, Mark added, his tone neutral rather than worried. By midday tomorrow, he'll contact the police, I continued, going over the scenario we had rehearsed. They'll take a report, but they'll explain that adults have a right to leave their marriages. They'll see no evidence of foul play, no reason to devote resources to finding a woman who simply walked away from her husband. And by the time he thinks to check your personal accounts, he'll find them empty, I finished. Legally, justifiably empty of exactly half of our legitimate joint assets. No more, no less. What Ethan would never discover, perhaps not until the mortgage company began demanding past due payments, was the evidence I had secured of his financial indiscretions, his unauthorized use of our home as collateral, his systematic draining of our investment accounts. By then, Chloe Sutton would be a ghost, and Eleanor Vance would be building a new life far from the coastal mansions of Malibu and charity galas. Are you scared? Mark asked, his question breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between us. I considered the question seriously, swirling the wine in my glass. Not of leaving, not of starting over. I paused, acknowledging a flicker of anxiety beneath my resolve. Maybe a little afraid of who I'll be without him. It's been 11 years of adapting to his expectations. You were Chloe long before you were Mrs. Sutton, Mark reminded me gently. And you'll be even more so as Eleanor. Outside, an owl hooted softly in the darkness. The sound drifted through the cabin's slightly open window. A creature of the night, comfortable in the shadows, sure of its path even without full light. I found myself smiling at the parallel. Tomorrow I dye this, I said, touching my dark hair that Ethan had always insisted I keep long, and I start to become someone he won't recognize if he passes me on the street. The thought should have been terrifying, erasing the external markers of an identity I had held for almost 4 decades. Instead, it felt like freedom, like stepping out of a costume I had worn for a grueling performance that had never earned genuine applause. The good news is, Mark said with a small smile, that Ethan has been so absorbed in himself for so long that he probably couldn't accurately describe you to investigators anyway. The observation drew a laugh from me, perhaps the first genuine one in months. You're right. He would remember the designer labels, the proper hairstyle, the acceptable jewelry. Not me. Never truly me. As the night deepened around the cabin, I felt the first tentative stirrings of something I hadn't experienced in years. Possibility. Somewhere beyond this night, beyond the disappearance I had so carefully orchestrated, Eleanor Vance was waiting to emerge. A woman undefined by her relationship to a man who had never truly seen her. A woman with plans, resources, and the hard-won wisdom of someone who had learned that disappearing could sometimes be the most powerful way to become visible to oneself. Get some sleep, Mark advised, gathering our empty wine glasses. Tomorrow's transformation begins early. I nodded, suddenly aware of the profound exhaustion that accompanied the adrenaline of my escape. As I got ready for bed in the cabin's small but comfortable guest room, I realized I had left my wedding ring not as a dramatic gesture for Ethan to find, but as a deliberate unburdening. Leaving behind the weight of promises that had proven hollow, expectations that had proven restrictive, and a life that had proven to be built on quicksand rather than a solid foundation. What Ethan would never understand, even as he searched for me in the coming days, was that I hadn't simply left him. I had chosen myself, perhaps for the first time since we met. And in that choice lay a power he had never recognized that I possessed. Do you think Ethan will regret not valuing me? Leave us your predictions in the comments. I woke to the sound of my new phone vibrating with an incoming call. The digital clock by the bed read 8:17 a.m., later than I had intended to sleep, but understandable given the emotional toll of the previous night. Mark's name lit up the screen. Ethan has filed a police report, he said without preamble when I answered. He's playing the part of the concerned husband hard. I sat bolt upright. So soon? That's faster than we anticipated. He has connections in the department. Remember that fundraiser he organized for the police chief's re-election campaign? They've agreed to treat this as a high-priority missing person case rather than waiting the usual 24 hours. This was the first real wrinkle in my carefully constructed escape plan. Ethan moving faster, using his influence more effectively than I had calculated. A chill ran through me despite the cabin's warmth. How do you know this? I asked, already moving to gather the clothes Mark had bought for Eleanor Vance. Simple items, practical, nothing like Chloe Sutton's designer wardrobe. I have a friend at the station. She called to warn me they're checking with acquaintances, including me. Expect a visit to my apartment within the hour. My heart rate sped up. You need to go. Already on my way to the secondary location. I grabbed the essentials and wiped down surfaces. Mark had planned contingencies like this. His background in high-level cybersecurity made him naturally paranoid. But this accelerates our timeline. You need to be fully transformed and on the road before midday. I looked at the array of supplies waiting on the counter: hair dye, colored contact lenses, makeup techniques researched specifically to alter the appearance of my facial structure. The physical transformation from Chloe to Eleanor would normally take careful time and practice. Now, it would have to be rushed. What about the financial transfers? I asked, mentally recalculating every step of my plan. Completed at 6 a.m. as scheduled. Half of all legitimate joint assets transferred to your accounts and untraceable. The documentation of his financial misconduct is secure in the cloud. The dead man's switch is active. The dead man's switch had been Mark's idea. If I didn't enter a specific code every 72 hours, the evidence of Ethan's financial irregularities would automatically be sent to his law firm's partners, the mortgage company, and the Madrid Bar Association. An insurance policy against Ethan potentially using his resources to pursue me beyond reasonable limits. He's giving interviews to the local news, Mark continued. Telemadrid is already running a segment about the prominent lawyer's missing wife. He's circulated a photo of you from the firm's Christmas party. I opened the local news website on my new phone and found myself staring at an image of Chloe Sutton in a burgundy cocktail dress, smiling next to Ethan at the firm's holiday celebration 4 months prior. The headline read, "Wife of prominent attorney vanishes after charity gala." Ethan's statement to the press was a masterpiece of concerned husband rhetoric. "I'm desperate to find my wife and ensure she's safe. Chloe has been under significant stress lately, and I fear she may be disoriented or confused. If anyone has seen her, please contact the authorities immediately." Stress, disoriented, confused, I read the words aloud, a bitter laugh escaping me. He's already setting up the mental health defense. Standard playbook, Mark confirmed. If she's not a victim of a crime, she must be unstable. It was exactly as we had predicted. Ethan would never accept that I had chosen to leave him, that I had orchestrated my own disappearance. His ego required that I be either kidnapped or mentally incompetent. The alternative, that I had outsmarted him, was inconceivable for a man who had built his identity on being the smartest person in every room. "There's more," Mark said, his voice taking on a gravity that gave me another chill. "He's offering a €50,000 reward for information leading to your safe return." This was unexpected. Not the reward itself, which was a predictable tactic, but the amount. €50,000 was substantial enough to motivate serious efforts from armchair detectives, desperate individuals, and even professional investigators outside of law enforcement. "That complicates things," I acknowledged, walking over to the window to check the cabin's perimeter. The property was secluded, surrounded by dense pines, but it no longer felt as safe as it had the night before. "We need to move up the timeline to get you out of the state." "I'm already working on it. The bus ticket to Seville is now useless. Too many potential witnesses, too easy to track. I'm arranging an alternative." The sound of highway traffic came through the phone. Mark was clearly driving as we spoke. "Check the second compartment of your go bag. There's an envelope with $10,000 in cash and an emergency backup ID." I opened the hidden compartment of the suitcase and found the sealed manila envelope exactly as described. Inside was a driver's license in the name of Sarah Navarro, with my photo, along with the cash in various denominations. We had prepared this secondary identity as an insurance policy, though I had hoped not to need it. "I'll be Eleanor until I cross state lines," I decided. "Then I'll switch to Sarah for the next leg." Good thinking. Less chance of establishing a pattern. Mark paused, and I could hear him changing lanes. "There's something else you need to know. Isabella Foster is no longer just Ethan's colleague. According to my source in the department, she's at your house right now, supporting Ethan through this difficult time. The revelation shouldn't have hurt. I had known about their affair for months. I had strategically used it as an alibi for my own preparations. Yet, something in the swiftness with which Isabella had moved into the role of supportive partner, likely sleeping in my bed less than 24 hours after I disappeared, felt like a final confirmation of how little my marriage had meant. Of course she is, I said, keeping my voice steady. That's actually helpful. The more Ethan is distracted with Isabella, the less effectively he'll be looking for me. Don't underestimate him, Chloe, Mark warned. Regardless of his personal flaws, he built his career on finding weaknesses in opposing positions. And right now, you are the opposition. He was right. For all his self-centeredness and betrayal, Ethan Sutton was a formidable legal mind with connections throughout southern Spain and resources I couldn't match. If he became dedicated to finding me with the same intensity he applied to winning cases, my carefully constructed escape could unravel. There's another development, Mark continued after a moment of silence. They've accessed your personal cell phone's location data. The police have triangulated it to the yacht club area, obviously, since that's where you left it. But they're expanding the search radius and pulling all surveillance camera footage within a 5-kilometer perimeter. This was expected, an elementary investigative procedure, but hearing it confirmed made the threat more immediate. If they identified Mark's Tesla in the security footage, the connection would be made, and he would face serious questioning. You need to get rid of your car, I said, realizing suddenly. They'll be looking for it now. Already arranged. I'm meeting a contact in Toledo who specializes in providing untraceable transportation. By tonight, the Tesla will be in a shipping container bound for the Valencia port, and I'll be driving something completely forgettable. Mark had resources and connections I hadn't known about until I approached him for help 8 months ago. His own experience escaping an abusive relationship had led him to develop a network of people who operated in the shadows of legality. Not criminals, exactly, but specialists in helping people legitimately disappear from dangerous situations. I moved to the bathroom and began the transformation process, applying the dark honey blonde dye that would replace my natural, nearly black color. As the chemical smell filled the small space, I studied my reflection. The face that had obediently smiled in countless firm photos, had maintained its composure through years of subtle diminishment. It had become a mask I wore so convincingly that I sometimes forgot what lay underneath. Do you think he ever loved me? I asked suddenly, the question coming from somewhere vulnerable that I had thought was sealed away. Mark was silent for a long moment. I think he loved having you, he finally replied. The perfect lawyer's wife. Beautiful and successful enough to reflect well on him. Compliant enough not to challenge his sense of superiority. Is that love? It's not, I finished, applying the dye in methodical strokes. It never was. While I waited for the color to set, I turned on the laptop Mark had provided, a clean device with security measures that would make it nearly impossible to trace. I needed to check my new financial accounts, confirm that the transfers had gone through successfully, and review transport options for getting out of Spain. The offshore account showed the expected balance, exactly half of what Ethan and I had legitimately accumulated together over 11 years of marriage. I had been meticulous on this point, working with a forensic accountant to identify and document which assets were genuinely joint and which Ethan had diverted to his private accounts or invested without my knowledge or consent. I had taken precisely what was legally mine, not a single cent more. What Ethan would discover gradually and painfully in the coming weeks was how much he had squandered or hidden that I had chosen not to pursue. The mortgaged house, the diverted retirement funds, the investments that had somehow never generated returns for our household. I had documented it all, but I had left it behind evidence that would only surface if he pushed too hard to find me. The screen of my laptop suddenly flickered, then it showed an incoming video call request from Mark. I accepted, and his face appeared, tense but focused as he drove. Change of plans, he said without a greeting. They found your cell phone at the yacht club, which means they know you left it there deliberately. Ethan is now suggesting to investigators that you might have been planning this disappearance for some time. They're going through your internet search history, bank records, phone records, everything. The acceleration of the investigation gave me a jolt of adrenaline. Ethan was thinking more clearly, more strategically than I had given him credit for. Perhaps the public loss of reputation, the prominent lawyer whose wife walked out on him during a charity gala, had sharpened his usually self-absorbed focus. "What does this mean for our timeline?" I asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. "It means that he'll connect you to me in hours, not days. Every minute you remain at the cabin increases the risk." Mark checked his rearview mirror, a habit born of justified paranoia. "I've arranged an extraction. There's a woman who will be arriving in about 45 minutes. Early 60s. Drives a brown Subaru Outback. She'll identify herself as Teresa from the book club. Go with her. Without questions. Without questions. Mark, I need you to disappear for a while." "Chloe," he cut me off. "Once they identify me as your helper, they'll monitor everything. My movements, communications, financial transactions. I've prepared for this, but it means I won't be able to contact you directly for a while." The realization that I was about to lose my only ally, my lifeline in this precarious transition, hit me with an unexpected force. "How will I know you're okay?" "Look for the Pacific Wildlife Fund donation confirmations. 1 donation every week, I'm safe." If they stop, he didn't need to finish the sentence. "Is this worth it?" I asked suddenly. "The risk to you? To your career? Maybe I should just..." He cut me off with firmness. "Don't even think about going back. You had valid, serious reasons to leave. Ethan's financial deceptions alone justify everything you're doing." His expression softened slightly. "Besides, this isn't my first time with disappearing acts. I know how to become invisible when I need to." I nodded, forcing away the doubt that had momentarily surfaced. "Thank you for everything. Finish becoming Eleanor," he instructed, his eyes back on the road. "Goodbye, Chloe." The video call ended, leaving me staring at my reflection in the darkened screen. Chloe Sutton in transition, with hair covered in dye, features still recognizable, but soon to be altered by a careful application of techniques researched over months of preparation. I went back to the bathroom to rinse the dye from my hair, watching as the water ran a golden brown color, washing away the darkness that had been a part of my identity for decades. As I dried and styled the new honey blonde locks, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror, which was precisely the point. Colored contact lenses were next, transforming my dark brown eyes to a light hazel color, which completely changed the impact of my face. Then the makeup, applied to subtly alter the apparent structure of my cheekbones, the fullness of my lips, the arch of my eyebrows. Small changes individually, but cumulatively they created a woman Ethan would pass by without a second glance. 40 minutes after Mark's call, I stood fully dressed as Eleanor Vance. With honey blonde hair, hazel eyes, wearing jeans and a simple blouse instead of Chloe's bespoke dresses, practical ankle boots instead of designer heels, a simple silver chain instead of flashy jewelry. I packed the few remaining items into my go bag, making sure to leave no trace of my presence in the cabin. From the window, I saw a brown Subaru turn onto the dirt road, right on time. A woman with silver hair and a practical denim jacket emerged, scanning the property with the alertness of someone accustomed to clandestine operations. As I prepared to meet her, to take the next step in my carefully planned disappearing act, I thought of Ethan, probably standing in our living room at this very moment, surrounded by police and investigators, with Isabella hovering at his side, his controlled fury mounting as he realized that his wife had not only left him, but had done so in a way that publicly undermined his carefully constructed image. The woman who had been Chloe Sutton smiled at that image, a smile that now belonged entirely to Eleanor Vance, and picked up her bag. It was time to disappear completely. Teresa from the book club turned out to be Maria, a retired social worker who now dedicated her life to helping women escape dangerous situations. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and laugh lines framed eyes that missed nothing as she drove us away from the cabin. "You're better prepared than most," she commented after we had been driving for almost an hour in comfortable silence. "Most women arrive with nothing but the clothes on their backs and terror in their eyes. I had time to plan, I replied, watching the landscape change from dense forest to open desert as we headed east. And resources, Maria nodded, her eyes never leaving the road. Resources help, but the planning, that's what makes the difference between those who get away and those who get dragged back. For the next few hours, we traveled on back roads, avoiding the main highways and their surveillance cameras. Maria was meticulous about varying our speed, taking unexpected turns, and changing license plates at a remote gas station where the attendant greeted her with familiarity but asked no questions. By late afternoon, we arrived at what appeared to be an abandoned motel on the outskirts of a small desert town. The faded sign read, Posada del Sol, but the parking lot was empty except for 3 well-maintained vehicles that contradicted the property's dilapidated exterior. Home base, Maria explained, turning around the back of the building. On the outside, it looks like nothing, which is exactly the point. Inside, the motel revealed itself to be a clean, functional safe house. The lobby had been converted into a common space with comfortable furniture, a well-stocked kitchen, and several workstations. 2 women looked up when we entered, one about my age, another barely out of her 20s, both with the watchful look of people accustomed to looking over their shoulders. "This is Eleanor," Maria introduced me, using my new name naturally. "She'll be with us briefly before continuing her journey." The women nodded but did not offer their names, another safety protocol in a place where identities were precious and fragile things. I recognized the careful positioning of the older woman sitting with her back to the wall with clear lines of sight to all entrances as the habit of someone who had learned vigilance the hard way. "You can use room 12, Maria told me, handing me a key attached to a simple wooden keychain. "There's secure internet access if you need it, but I advise a minimal digital footprint for at least the first 72 hours after a disappearance." I thanked her and headed to the room, small but impeccably clean with blackout curtains and a white noise machine next to the bed. After setting down my bag, I allowed myself a moment to acknowledge the unreality of my situation. 2 days ago, I had been Chloe Sutton, a respected interior designer and the wife of prominent lawyer Ethan Sutton, preparing for a charity gala in our coastal community. Now, I was Eleanor Vance, a woman with blonde hair and hazel eyes, hiding in a secret desert safe house. A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Maria was there, holding a tablet. "I thought you'd want to see this," she said, her expression carefully neutral. "Your disappearance has made national news." She handed me the tablet showing an article from El País. "Search intensifies for prominent Spanish lawyer's missing wife." The story included a formal portrait of Ethan with an appropriately concerned expression, alongside a recent photo of me from a charity event. The article quoted Ethan extensively on my increasingly erratic behavior in recent months and his fears for my safety. "He's certainly committed to the narrative," I observed, scanning the article with professional detachment. "Suggesting I might have been showing symptoms of early-onset dementia. That's creative." Maria studied me with new respect. Most women would be upset to see their husband publicly questioning their mental health. I'm sure he'd prefer that to the alternative, admitting that his wife left him because she found out about his financial fraud and infidelity. I handed the tablet back. "Besides, it's what I expected. Ethan will protect his reputation at all costs." "There's something else," Maria said, her tone shifting slightly. "Something that wasn't in our initial report from Mark." She showed me another news article from a local Madrid business journal. "This ran 3 days ago, before your disappearance." The headline read, "Sutton and Associates to open NYC office amid expansion." The article detailed how Ethan Sutton, formerly of Ortega, Garrix, and Associates, was launching his own firm with backing from major investors, including the Ferrer Financial Group. "Ferrer," I repeated, the name registering immediately. "As in Isabella Ferrer?" Maria nodded. According to this, her father, Roberto Ferrer, is the primary investor in Ethan's new firm. The NYC office is slated to open next month, with Ethan relocating to oversee operations. I took the tablet back, scanning the article more carefully. There it was in black and white. Proof of plans Ethan had never mentioned. A major professional move and relocation he had kept completely hidden from his wife. He was already planning to leave anyway, I said softly, the understanding crystallizing with perfect clarity. All those mysterious investments, the mortgage on our house. He was funding his own exit strategy. There's more. Maria swiped to another article, this one from a real estate publication dated just a week earlier. Ethan Sutton and Isabella Ferrer buy Manhattan penthouse for $4.2 million. The floor seemed to move beneath my feet as I looked at the photo of my husband and his mistress standing proudly in a sleek Manhattan apartment with panoramic views of Central Park. The article mentioned they were preparing for a bi-coastal lifestyle with the launch of Sutton and Associates East Coast headquarters. $4.2 million, I repeated, my voice muffled. That's almost exactly the amount he's drained from our accounts over the last year. Maria's expression was compassionate but not surprised. Men like your husband often follow predictable patterns. They don't leave until everything is arranged in their favor. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, the tablet still clutched in my hands. All those months I had spent planning my escape, gathering evidence of Ethan's financial deceptions, documenting his affair with Isabella. And all along, he had been preparing to discard me anyway. The mortgage capital he had stolen, the investment accounts he had drained, the retirement funds he had borrowed from, all funneled into his new life with Isabella. A life that had been taking shape parallel to my own escape plans. When was he going to tell me? I wondered aloud, though the answer was obvious. Ethan would have sprung it on me at the most advantageous time for him, leaving me with as little time and as few resources as possible to contest his actions. Does this change anything for you? Maria asked quietly. Knowing he was planning to leave. I considered the question carefully, examining my emotional response to this revelation. There was shock, certainly, and a strange sense of vindication. My suspicions were not only correct but perhaps even underestimated. But beneath those immediate reactions was something unexpected. Relief. It changes everything, I said finally, looking at Maria with a new clarity. And nothing at all. She raised an eyebrow, prompting me to elaborate. I've spent months questioning whether I was overreacting, whether I should have tried harder to save my marriage, I explained. A part of me still wondered if I was making a catastrophic mistake by disappearing, if there could have been a path to reconciliation if I had confronted Ethan directly. I gestured to the tablet with its damning evidence. Now I know there wasn't. While I was planning my escape, he was arranging my abandonment. The only difference is that my path preserves my dignity and financial security. His would have left me shocked and destitute. Maria nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. That's why we document everything. That's why we gather evidence even when we aren't sure we'll need it. Because men like your husband rewrite history to fit their narratives. I thought of the cloud storage filled with meticulous records of Ethan's financial manipulations. The evidence I had compiled not for vindication but for self-preservation. Evidence that now served a dual purpose, to protect me from his pursuit and to provide irrefutable proof that my departure had been not only justified but necessary. I need to contact Mark, I said, getting to my feet with renewed determination. This changes our negotiating position significantly. Mark has disappeared, Maria reminded me. But I have a secure communication channel I can use in emergencies. This qualifies. She took the tablet back. What do you want me to tell him? I thought carefully, considering the strategic implications of this new information. Tell him to fast-track the release of the documentation to Ethan's former partners at Ortega, Garrig's, and Associates. They deserve to know that he's been stealing from their clients for his new firm. And tell him to anonymously tip off the Madrid Bar Association about the Manhattan penthouse purchase. They'll be very interested in how an attorney supposedly worried about his missing wife managed to close on a luxury property days before she vanished. Maria's smile was one of approval. Anything else? Yes, I said, a plan rapidly forming in my mind. I want to modify my escape route. Instead of going west as we originally planned, I'm going east. To New York. Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. That seems risky. Won't New York be the first place they look once the connection to Ethan's firm becomes public? Exactly, I confirmed. They'll be looking for Chloe Sutton in New York. A desperate woman trying to confront her husband and his mistress. No one will be looking for Eleanor Vance, the independent business consultant who arrived in the city months before Ethan and Isabella's planned relocation. Comprehension dawned in Maria's eyes. You're going to establish yourself on their territory before they get there. I'm going to be there waiting when their carefully constructed new life implodes, I corrected. Not to confront or expose them personally. That would put me at risk. But to ensure I have a front row seat to the consequences of their actions. For the first time since I had placed my wedding ring on that cocktail table at the yacht club, I felt something beyond determination and relief. I felt a spark of genuine excitement for the future. Not a future defined by reacting to Ethan's betrayal, but one built entirely on my own terms. I'll need a new identity packet, I told Maria. Eleanor Vance needs a career trajectory that makes her valuable in Manhattan's competitive business environment. Maria nodded. I know someone who specializes in creating verifiable work histories, professional references, even digital footprints that can withstand moderate scrutiny. It won't be cheap. Money is no object, I assured her. I have access to exactly half of what Ethan and I legitimately earned together, which is more than enough to fund this next chapter. As Maria left to make the necessary arrangements, I opened my go bag and pulled out the secure laptop Mark had provided. It was time to adapt my carefully constructed escape plan to incorporate this new information. Not with panic or reaction, but with the same methodical attention to detail that had characterized my preparations from the beginning. I opened a new document and began to type, outlining Eleanor Vance's background, credentials, and professional specialties. After 11 years of suppressing my legal education to accommodate Ethan's ego, I would now put it to use, building an identity that could navigate Manhattan's sophisticated business environment. An identity that would allow me not only to escape Ethan Sutton but to thrive in the very world he planned to conquer. On the bed beside me, the tablet continuously updated with news of the search for Chloe Sutton. The police had officially classified me as a missing person. Ethan had raised the reward to €100,000. Isabella Foster was now openly acting as the family spokesperson, her concerned expression perfectly calibrated for the cameras as she pleaded for information on her dear friend, Chloe. The performance was flawless, except for the 4-carat diamond on Isabella's left hand, visible in several of the press photos, which matched the description of a ring Ethan had purchased 2 months earlier from a jeweler in Madrid. A purchase I had discovered while meticulously tracking his financial deceptions. They had been planning this, Ethan's new firm, his Manhattan penthouse, his engagement, all while systematically draining the financial resources I had helped build over 11 years of marriage. If I hadn't discovered his deception and planned my own exit, I would have been left with nothing but an empty apology and perhaps a symbolic settlement negotiated by whatever firm lawyer Ethan assigned to handle his divorce. Instead, I had secured my fair share of our assets, retained evidence of his misconduct, and created an escape route that would allow me to rebuild my life on my own terms. And now, with this new information, I could position myself to witness the inevitable unraveling of his carefully constructed plans. As the desert sunset painted the motel room in shades of gold and amber, I felt a peculiar sense of gratitude toward Ethan and Isabella. Their betrayal had forced me to reclaim parts of myself that I had gradually given away, my ambition, my independence, my clear-eyed assessment of reality without the distortion of wishful thinking. By conspiring to discard me, they had inadvertently set me free. What would you do if you discovered such a shocking truth? Share your opinion in the comments. And don't forget to like this video if it kept you hooked. 3 days after arriving at the Posada del Sol, I barely recognized myself. Not just physically, but fundamentally. Eleanor Vance was taking shape as something more than just an alias. She was becoming a fully realized identity with a carefully crafted past, present, and future. "Your documentation is ready," Maria announced, entering my room after a brief knock. She carried a slim leather portfolio embossed with subtle geometric patterns. David outdid himself this time. David, I had learned, was Maria's enigmatic contact who specialized in creating legitimate-looking identities. Not fake identities, an important distinction in Maria's network. Eleanor Vance was technically me, just with a different name and a carefully constructed background that would withstand scrutiny without triggering concerns about identity theft or fraud charges. "Everything in here has a solid basis," Maria explained as she opened the portfolio. "Eleanor Vance has a social security number tied to a real person born in 1980 who died in infancy. The degree certificates are from institutions that have suffered an unfortunate database corruption in specific year ranges. Your work history includes companies that have either closed or been acquired, making verification a challenge, but not impossible." I examined the documents with a growing appreciation for their sophistication. A bachelor's degree in business administration from a respectable state university. A master's degree in organizational development from a private college that had merged with a larger institution 5 years ago. A work history that showed progressive experience in corporate consulting with firms that had, in fact, existed but were now defunct or absorbed by conglomerates. "It's brilliant," I said, running my fingers over the embossed diploma. "They look completely authentic." "They are authentic," Maria corrected. "Just not for the reasons most people would assume. David doesn't create forgeries, he creates plausible alternatives using legitimate processes and systemic vulnerabilities." The portfolio also contained bank statements showing a modest but respectable financial history for Eleanor Vance, credit reports that reflected careful management of limited resources, even medical records that documented routine care at clinics in various cities, creating the image of someone who moved frequently for work. "Your new digital footprint is being established as we speak," Maria continued. "A LinkedIn profile, professional email history, even a carefully backdated social media presence with appropriate privacy settings. Minimal content, but enough to look like a real person who is simply selective about their online presence." I nodded, understanding the delicate balance. Too little online presence would seem suspicious in today's world. Too much would create unnecessary exposure and opportunities for inconsistencies. "What about references?" I asked, thinking of the inevitable verification calls that would come if I landed a consulting job in New York. Maria smiled. "You have 3 former supervisors and 2 colleagues ready to give you excellent recommendations. They are real people who work with our network, professionals who understand the need for new beginnings and have agreed to serve as references for identities like yours." The thoroughness of these preparations was astonishing. While I had spent months gathering evidence of Ethan's betrayal and securing my financial assets, Maria's network had clearly spent years developing systems to help people safely disappear and rebuild. "There's something else," Maria said, pulling one last document from the portfolio. "Your consulting specialty." I took the paper that outlined Eleanor Vance's particular expertise, corporate reorganization following leadership transitions, with an emphasis on preserving institutional knowledge while facilitating cultural renewal. "It's perfect," I said, immediately seeing the strategic value. "This positions me as someone that firms would want to bring in during exactly the kind of transition that Ethan is planning with his new firm." Maria nodded. David researched Sutton and Associates' public announcements. They plan to absorb several smaller practices as they establish their New York presence. They'll need exactly the kind of expertise Eleanor Vance offers. "So, I could be hired by one of those firms before they get acquired," I said, the possibilities unfolding in my mind, giving me legitimate proximity to Ethan's operation without directly engaging with him. "Precisely," she confirmed. "You would be positioned to observe without being obvious, with a professional reason to understand the details of these business transitions." I leaned back, taking in the elegant complexity of this approach. Not just escaping Ethan, but positioning myself to witness the consequences of his actions without compromising my new identity. "There's one more component to consider," Maria said, her tone becoming more serious. "Your psychological preparation." I raised an eyebrow, prompting her to continue. "Maintaining a new identity isn't just about paperwork and appearance," she explained. "It's about inhabiting a different perspective, developing new instincts, responding authentically as Eleanor rather than reflexively as Chloe." This was something I hadn't fully considered. The physical transformation and the paper trail were tangible steps, things I could methodically execute. But the internal shift from Chloe Sutton to Eleanor Vance required a different kind of preparation. "We have someone who can help you with that," Maria continued. "Dr. Renata Mizrahi. Officially a cognitive behavioral therapist, unofficially an expert in helping people transition between identities. She has worked with witnesses in protection programs, undercover agents, and women in situations like yours." "Identity training," I said, understanding the concept immediately. "Exactly. She'll help you develop Eleanor's mannerisms, speech patterns, reflexive responses, all the subtle tells that distinguish one person from another beyond physical appearance." I thought of the way I naturally moved, the poised and controlled movements cultivated through years as the perfect lawyer's wife, always conscious of representing Ethan's interests in public. Eleanor would move differently. She would speak differently. She would react differently to social cues. "When can I start?" I asked. "She's here," Maria replied. "In room 17. She can work with you for 3 days before you need to move on. 3 days to fundamentally transform how I presented myself to the world." It seemed impossible, until I remembered how thoroughly I had already transformed my appearance, my financial situation, and my future plans in less than a week. "There's one more thing you should see," Maria added, pulling out her tablet. "Your disappearance has triggered some unexpected consequences for Ethan." She showed me a breaking news story from a Madrid business publication. "Ortega, Garrix, and Associates announces internal investigation following Sutton's departure." The article detailed how Ethan's former law firm had initiated a forensic audit of all accounts managed by Ethan after receiving concerning information from a confidential source about potential client fund misappropriation. "Mark," I said softly, recognizing the timing of this development. "He released the documentation." Maria nodded. "Apparently, your husband's former partners are not pleased to find out that he's been systematically preparing to compete with them while still accessing their client information." A second article reported that the Madrid Bar Association had also opened an investigation into Ethan's professional conduct, specifically with regard to potential conflicts of interest in his representation of the Ferrer Financial Group while he was developing personal financial entanglements with the Ferrer family. "It's starting to unravel for him," I observed, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and detachment. "Faster than I had anticipated." "Men like your husband build houses of cards," Maria said. "Impressive from a distance, but structurally unstable. They usually maintain the illusion through constant adjustments and manipulations. Once they lose control of the narrative, the whole thing comes down." My phone, the secure device Mark had provided, vibrated with an encrypted message notification. The sender was identified only as red_M, but I recognized the communication protocol we had established before Mark disappeared. The message was brief. "Packet delivered to NYT investigative team. Expect major coverage in 48 hours. Accelerate timeline. Transport arranged for tomorrow. Aero 600. "Mark has stepped things up," I said to Maria, showing her the message. "The New York Times has received documentation on Ethan." Maria's eyebrows raised. "That changes everything. Once the Times publishes, this will become a national story, not just about a missing woman, but about high-level legal and financial wrongdoing." I nodded, understanding the strategic shift. Ethan will be fighting for his professional survival, not just looking for his missing wife. His priorities will change overnight, which creates the perfect opportunity for Eleanor Vance to establish herself in New York while the attention is focused elsewhere, Maria concluded. Brilliant timing. I spent the rest of the day with Dr. Mizrahi, a slight woman with piercing gray eyes and an analytical approach to identity transformation. She observed my movements, speech patterns, and reflexive gestures with clinical precision. Then, she began the process of helping me develop alternatives consistent with Eleanor Vance's background and personality. Your default posture is too perfect, she noted as I instinctively sat with ramrod-straight elegance during our initial session. Chloe was trained to present flawless composure in social settings. Eleanor is confident but more relaxed. She hasn't spent years performing for her husband's colleagues. Hour after hour, she helped me identify and modify dozens of unconscious behaviors that marked me as Chloe Sutton. The way I automatically scanned a room upon entering, evaluating the most influential people present. How I modulated my voice when expressing opinions, softening them just enough to seem engaged but not challenging. Even the specific way I held a wine glass, with fingers positioned with practiced elegance. Eleanor carries herself with the easy confidence of someone who trusts her intellect instead of her appearance or connections, Dr. Mizrahi explained. She's professionally successful but not socially performative. She makes direct eye contact, speaks with unfiltered expertise on her topics of knowledge, and doesn't instinctively defer to male authority figures. By the time evening fell, my cheeks ached from consciously relaxing facial muscles that had been perpetually held in Chloe's pleasant, attentive expression. My lower back ached from allowing a slight curve to my posture instead of holding the perfect alignment I had internalized over years of representing Ethan at social events. It's physically exhausting at first, Dr. Mizrahi acknowledged as she concluded our first day. You're retraining muscle memory that's been reinforced for over a decade. But in a week, these new patterns will begin to feel natural. In a month, they'll become your default. That night, I practiced Eleanor's signature in the privacy of my room, a confident, flowing script distinct from Chloe's more controlled handwriting. I recorded myself speaking about topics of organizational development, then played back the audio to identify what inflections still needed adjusting. I walked the small room, consciously adopting Eleanor's more relaxed gait. The physical and behavioral transformation was demanding, but nothing compared to the psychological change required. Chloe Sutton had been defined by her relationship to others, Ethan's wife, a designer for wealthy clients, an appropriate presence at firm events. Eleanor Vance existed independently, defined by her expertise and her choices instead of her associations. The morning brought a flurry of activity as the news broke exactly as Mark had predicted. The New York Times published a detailed exposé titled, "The California Lawyer's Missing Wife and the Missing Millions, Inside Ethan Sutton's Web of Deceit." The article methodically detailed Ethan's systematic draining of joint accounts, the unauthorized mortgage on their shared home, and the plans to launch a competing firm funded in part by assets that legally belonged to his wife, all while he was presenting himself as a concerned husband desperate to find his vanished spouse. Within hours, the story was picked up by national networks. Ethan's carefully constructed image as the concerned husband was transformed overnight into that of a potential financial predator. The public sympathy he had cultivated evaporated as financial journalists began to question the timing of his Manhattan real estate purchase and his engagement to Isabella Foster. "Your transport is ready," Maria announced, entering my room as I finished packing the identity portfolio. "A commercial flight would be too risky right now with your face still in the news, even with your changed appearance. We've arranged private transport." "A private jet?" I asked, surprised that Maria's network had such resources. She smiled. "Not exactly. You'll be traveling with a medical transport company that moves patients between specialized treatment centers. On paper, you're a cognitive therapy patient being transferred to a rehabilitation facility in Pennsylvania. From there, you'll have ground transport to New York." The creativity of these arrangements continued to impress me. "And the New York lodging?" I asked. "I assume a hotel is too exposed." Eleanor Vance has leased a furnished apartment in Brooklyn Heights through a corporate housing service that specializes in housing business consultants on long-term assignments, Maria explained. Minimum 3 months, all utilities included, secure building with privacy-conscious management. Within an hour, I was saying my goodbyes to the Posada del Sol, to Maria, and to the last vestiges of Chloe Sutton. As I settled into the medical transport aircraft, disguised as a patient being moved between facilities, I reflected on the extraordinary transformation of the last week. 7 days ago, I had been in an emerald silk dress, watching my husband dance with his mistress, preparing to execute an escape plan just over 8 months in the making. Today, I was Eleanor Vance, with honey blonde hair and hazel eyes, with a full professional identity and the financial resources to set myself up in a new city, while my husband's carefully constructed life publicly imploded. As the aircraft took off, flying me east toward my strategically chosen future, I felt a profound sense of having reclaimed control not just of my circumstances but of my fundamental identity. The woman Ethan had slowly diminished over 11 years of marriage was gone. Not because she had vanished, but because she had strategically transformed herself into someone stronger, more autonomous, and completely out of his reach. Chloe Sutton had disappeared without a word, leaving behind only her wedding ring and a husband who would soon discover that underestimating her had been the most momentous mistake of his life. What does it mean to you to reclaim your own identity? Leave your opinion in the comments. A year later, the autumn sun streamed through the windows of my Brooklyn Heights apartment, illuminating the space I had carefully designed over the past year. Clean lines, warm textures, and a functional elegancia, physical manifestation of Eleanor Vance's approach to life. Nothing like the show house in Beverly Hills that Chloe Sutton had maintained to Ethan's exacting standards. I sipped my coffee, contemplating the Manhattan skyline across the East River as I reviewed client emails on my tablet. In 12 months, Eleanor Vance Consulting had established a solid reputation for helping organizations navigate complex transitions, exactly the expertise I had strategically developed. My current client list included 2 law firms, a publishing house, and a financial services boutique, all of them experiencing significant leadership changes that required a delicate hand. The New York Times alert that popped up on my screen didn't surprise me. I had been expecting it given yesterday's court proceedings. The headline was concise: disgraced lawyer Ethan Sutton sentenced to 5 years for fraud and embezzlement. I opened the article, scanning the details I already knew from following the case through public records. Ethan had pleaded guilty to multiple counts of client fund embezzlement, tax evasion, and fraud related to his failed attempt to launch Sutton and Associates. The plea deal had reduced his possible 15-year sentence to 5, with the possibility of parole after serving 30 months. What the article didn't mention, what no public record revealed, was that the original evidence that triggered the investigation had come from documentation meticulously maintained by his missing wife. The disappearance of Chloe Sutton remained officially unsolved, though interest had waned as Ethan's legal troubles mounted and the more sensational story of his financial crimes took center stage. My secure phone, the one I used only for communications with Mark and Maria's network, vibrated with an incoming message. Mark had kept up his weekly confirmation system all year, a simple donation receipt to the Pacific Wildlife Fund that would pop up every Friday to signal that he was still safe. This was our first direct communication in months. Justice served, the message read, though imperfectly. Isabella Foster also got a separate deal, testifying against Ethan in exchange for probation. She returns to Madrid today if you want to see the arrival. Terminal 4 at 3 p.m. I put down my coffee, considering the invitation. Isabella Foster, once poised to become Mrs. Ethan Sutton and co-owner of a Manhattan penthouse, returning to Madrid in disgrace after testifying against her ex-fiancé. There was a certain symmetry to it. The woman who had danced with my husband as if I were nothing, now diminished and exposed. A year ago, I might have felt vindicated, even triumphant, at the thought of witnessing Isabella's humiliation. Now, I felt only a distant curiosity, the kind one might have about characters in a story that once seemed important but had gradually lost its meaning. No need, I replied to Mark. That chapter is closed. I returned to my emails, responding to a client's question about managing their upcoming merger announcement. Eleanor Vance's life held my full attention now, her clients, her growing professional network, her carefully curated social connections. The woman who had placed a wedding ring on a cocktail table and walked away from 11 years of marriage now existed only in police files and fading news archives. My doorbell rang, precisely at 10 a.m. Diane Chung arriving for our scheduled meeting. I had met Diane 6 months earlier at a women's professional networking event where her expertise in financial restructuring had complemented my background in organizational development. We had subsequently collaborated on several projects, developing both a professional partnership and a cautious friendship. The Hamilton proposal is ready to review, Diane announced as she entered, placing her leather briefcase on my dining table. At 45, she had the confident demeanor of someone who had successfully navigated male-dominated industries without giving up her authentic self, exactly the type of woman Chloe had rarely encountered in Ethan's carefully controlled social circle. Perfect timing, I replied, carrying a second mug of coffee to the table. I just finished the cultural evaluation section last night. We worked efficiently through the morning, refining our proposal for a law firm that was undergoing a significant restructuring after a merger. The irony was not lost on me. Eleanor Vance now built her reputation by helping organizations through exactly the type of transition Ethan had planned before his downfall. "Did you see the news?" Diane asked during a brief break, her expression carefully neutral. She knew nothing of my past, but like most professionals in our field, she followed major business-related legal cases. "About Ethan Sutton?" "Yes, just this morning." 5 years seems light for what he did, Diane observed. "Though I suppose his reputation is destroyed anyway." I nodded evasively. The legal system rarely metes out perfect justice. "And that poor wife of his, what was her name?" "Chloe." Diane shook her head with sympathy. "They never found her, did they?" "No," I replied, maintaining Eleanor's slightly detached interest in a news story that had no personal connection to her. The investigation seemed to shift focus once his financial crimes came to light, though. "I remember the case fascinated me when it first broke," Diane continued. "A woman disappears without a trace, leaving only her wedding ring. Then evidence surfaces that suggests her husband was planning to leave her anyway. Like something out of a movie." "Life is often stranger than fiction," I offered, steering the conversation back to our proposal. After Diane left, I felt drawn to the secure laptop I kept in my home office, the one I used exclusively for monitoring matters related to my old life. I hadn't checked it in weeks, maintaining my resolution to focus forward rather than backward. But today's news warranted an exception. The disappearance of Chloe Sutton had gradually faded from public interest as Ethan's legal troubles mounted. The police investigation remained technically open but dormant. The most recent media mention had been a brief, "Where Are They Now?" segment on a true crime podcast 3 months prior, re-examining familiar theories. Chloe had suffered an unrelated mishap. She had taken her own life due to undisclosed mental health issues. She had planned her disappearance to escape a failing marriage. All speculation, with no conclusions. I closed the laptop, satisfied that Chloe Sutton now existed primarily as a footnote in the story of Ethan's downfall rather than as an active investigation. The careful planning that had enabled my disappearance had proven to be effective beyond my most optimistic projections. My afternoon included a video consultation with a new potential client, a publishing house seeking guidance on integrating a recently acquired literary agency. As I discussed change management strategies and cultural alignment, I found myself fully present as Eleanor Vance, with no echoes of Chloe Sutton's more deferential communication style. Dr. Mizrahi had been right. The new patterns had become natural in a matter of weeks, automatic in a matter of months. The physical transformation had been equally complete. My honey blonde hair now grew naturally from the root, maintained with subtle highlights. The colored contact lenses had given way to laser eye surgery that permanently lightened my dark brown eyes to a more amber hue, a medical procedure justified by practical benefits but which served the dual purpose of a permanent identity transformation. The evening found me at the opening of a small gallery in Chelsea, supporting a photographer whose work I had admired since I discovered it shortly after arriving in New York. The space hummed with quiet conversation as attendees moved among stunning black and white images that documented urban transformation, formerly abandoned buildings now reinvented as community spaces. "Eleanor, I wasn't sure you'd make it," the photographer, Sophia, greeted me warmly. In her early 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and the observant eyes of an artist, she had become one of my few close connections in the city. "I wouldn't have missed it," I replied sincerely. "Your work deserves to be celebrated." As I circulated the gallery, engaging in the kind of authentic conversations that Eleanor naturally cultivated, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the street-facing window. The woman who looked back at me bore no resemblance to the carefully groomed lawyer's wife who had once moved through Madrid's charity galas with studied elegance. This woman, with her relaxed confidence, her genuine smile, and her natural poise, was completely her own. The gallery door opened, letting in a newcomer who caught my eye immediately, not because I recognized him, but because of his striking resemblance to Ethan. The same tall build and distinguished graying hair. A similar confident bearing. For a disorienting moment, my carefully constructed new reality seemed to wobble. Then he turned fully into the room, and the resemblance dissolved. His features were completely different, his expression open and engaged rather than calculating. Just a random man attending an art opening, notable only for a superficial similarity to someone from my past. "Are you all right?" Sophia asked, noticing my momentary stillness. "Perfectly," I assured her, the brief disorientation already fading. "Just admiring how the light plays in your harbor series." Later that night, as I walked home along the Brooklyn Promenade, I stopped to contemplate the lit skyline of Manhattan. Somewhere in Spain, Ethan Sutton was beginning his first night of incarceration. Somewhere in Madrid, Isabella Foster was likely facing the rubble of plans that had once seemed secure. And here I was, a continent away, building a life that was completely my own. My secure phone, the one I used only for communications, vibrated with another message from Mark. "Our old house in Beverly Hills sold at auction today. Last link broken. You are officially and completely free." The message highlighted a truth I had already internalized. My liberation had never depended on Ethan's conviction or the sale of our old house. Those were merely external confirmations of a freedom I had claimed the moment I walked out of the Malibu Yacht Club, leaving my wedding ring behind. I continued my walk home, planning the next day's client meetings and considering which of Sophia's photographs might complement the aesthetic of my apartment. Eleanor Vance's thoughts, Eleanor Vance's plans, Eleanor Vance's life, authentic and self-directed in a way that Chloe Sutton's never had been. The next morning brought an unexpected email to my professional account. A consulting inquiry from Barrett and Hughes, the prestigious law firm where Ethan had hoped to establish his New York practice before his plans collapsed. They were seeking organizational development support after a major leadership transition. The symmetry was so perfect, it almost made me laugh out loud. The very firm that had featured in Ethan's escape fantasy now wanted to hire the expertise of the woman who had escaped him. I drafted a crisp, professional reply, accepting their invitation to discuss their needs further, signing it with Eleanor Vance's confident signature. As I prepared for my day, applying subtle makeup and selecting a tailored outfit that balanced professionalism with Eleanor's more relaxed aesthetic, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the last year. From the desperate wife placing her wedding ring on a cocktail table to an established consultant with growing recognition in my field, I had traveled more than just a physical distance. My secure phone vibrated with one final message from Mark. "Today is the first anniversary. Congratulations on your rebirth." I hadn't been tracking the date, but he was right. It had been exactly 1 year since the Malibu Yacht Club charity gala. Since watching Ethan dance with Isabella as if I were nothing. Since executing the escape plan that had transformed not only my circumstances, but my fundamental sense of self. I sent him a simple reply. It's not a rebirth. It's a revelation. Because that was the truth at the center of my journey. Eleanor Vance wasn't a fabricated identity I had created to escape Ethan Sutton. She was the woman who had always existed beneath the carefully maintained facade of Chloe. The authentic self I had gradually given away over 11 years of marriage to a man who valued appearance over substance, control over partnership. By disappearing, I had paradoxically become more visible to myself than I had been in years. By vanishing without a word, I had found my true voice. By walking away from a man who danced with another woman as if I were nothing, I had discovered that I was all I needed to be. As I stepped out into the crisp autumn morning, Eleanor Vance moved forward with purpose, leaving the ghost of Chloe Sutton exactly where she belonged, in the past, along with the wedding ring on that cocktail table and the husband who had never truly seen the woman he married. Sometimes, I reflected as I joined the stream of New Yorkers heading to their daily purposes, the most powerful statement isn't what you say when you leave. It's that you leave everything behind. That evening, I returned to Sophia's gallery, and so did the man from the night before. This time, our eyes met across the room, and he offered a warm, unassuming smile. He introduced himself as Julian, an architect who admired Sophia's work on urban renewal. We spoke for hours, not about business or connections, but about art, cities, and second chances. For the first time in over a decade, I felt a connection that was effortless and real, unburdened by performance or expectation. As he walked me home under the Brooklyn Bridge, I realized my journey wasn't about escaping a man, but about arriving at myself. The past was a ghost, but my future, bright and full of authentic possibility, was just beginning. If this story of transformation and renewal moved you, be sure to like this video and share it with your friends. For more exciting stories that empower and inspire, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single chapter of what's to come.